quite an experience. Wonderful, wonderful bunch of people. It's a pleasure to be here, sure.
You know, when we think of the word heritage, that runs really deep in my soul and also in Joe's. Just across the street is where his grandmother used to live, and we walked across that lawn a while ago, and I said, Joe, I wonder how many little footprints you had here. God only knows, God only knows. I'm Catherine Walton Nance. I tell everybody, and my father was Floyd Walton. He migrated to Oklahoma from Kentucky on a covered wagon. My mother was raised at Whit Springs, and she was on a wagon train and walked all the way to Oklahoma, and that's where they met. And then in the late 20s, they heard that they were giving away land here in Newton County if we'd just come and homestead it. Here they came in an old Dodge truck. They camped below the bridge there at Pruitt. The bridge my daddy built. He helped build that old bridge. That was his first job. But while we were camped out, our homestead was about 3 miles up the river, which Daddy had to walk up, cut the logs, build the house, come back down, work there at Pruitt. He helped Mr. Hammonds put those little cabins up on the bridge. They took some old logs and rolled them, put them up there on that old bridge where I'm sure a lot of you have seen those. Anyway, while Mama was camped out, I was born right there underneath that bridge. She only had 2 babies while she was camped out. I'm one of 9 children.
And I'm really proud of her mother. She had 9 children right there at Pruitt and spent not one day in the hospital. All of them right there.
Well, back in those days, we were tough. I mean, you had to be to survive. But I think the thing that I like about the old people is that we were self-sufficient. We didn't need a car, we didn't need money. All we needed was the land, and we could make a living right there off of that land. I want to tell you, before I ask Joe a question here, this painting depicts Thomas Hart Benton. Well, many years later, in the late 40s, my father was appointed postmaster, and we moved back from the homestead down to Pruitt. And Daddy, the camp, that's where the general store was. Well, everybody just camped in our backyard, and we had a big garden, and we had chickens. If you needed eggs or groceries, so what? You just come to the garden and get them. Well, Thomas Hart Benton would camp out there with Billie Jean Houston. And Joe and I had coffee with him, and then they were going to do a documentary of him on the Buffalo River. They didn't have canoes back in those days, and Joe and I had a canoe, so they borrowed our canoe to do his documentary on the Buffalo River. They even borrowed one of Joe's shirts. When I say we were self-sufficient, up on the homestead, Daddy had a grist mill. You bring your corn to me, I grind it up for the hats. And along the way, you know, everybody took care of everybody. When Daddy was walking in the woods, coursing a beet tree, how many of you know how to course a beet tree? Not one of them. 2 people, yeah. Well, it's very simple. I'll teach you one of these days. He would be looking for these large, preferably sassafras trees, which he would take to the house, and he would cut them and put them up in the barn so that they would kind of dry. When somebody died, he was the casket maker. Of course, back then we didn't embalm people, so we worked all night building the casket, and the women would line it with the quilts, and then the next day we buried them. And we were self-sufficient. The Buffalo River was really a big, big part of our life. We always had out trot lines. Of course, we were always down there swimming and having the time of our life, and I can't imagine my life without the Buffalo River. In fact, I think I was the first person that brought Dr. Neil Compton to Newton County, and he and I and Joe floated the river a lot together. So I don't think I could ever imagine my life without that. Joe, tell them about your ancestors.
Well, talking on my mother's side of the family, she was a Pruitt. And her grandfather was a Confederate soldier, had a little farm in Tennessee, and he was in the war, the Civil War, and got captured. And he and some other guys, they were in a Union prison camp. And if you know much about history, you know that the situation was very, very, very difficult. Your chances were slim to none. So 4 of them decided their only chance to survive was to try to escape. They were successful in escaping, and it was along the Mississippi River, but this part I'm not clear on if he was injured in the war or injured in escaping, but his left arm was in bad shape, and as they were successful in their escape, well, his buddies saw that he was in bad shape. It was gangrenous and obviously infected and everything, and there wasn't anything but to do, but he just said, let's just do it right now, boys, and he laid on the ground, and one of them sharpened his knife, and they just cut his arm off. Well, by the time they got to civilization, the war was over, and so everything was over, and they just started to say goodbye and started walking, and he walked for weeks and weeks and weeks, and finally got back to his little farm in Tennessee. But the carpetbaggers had wiped him out. He had nothing. And he found his wife with some other ladies just living underneath some trees. And they heard about the Arkansas country out here, that you could come out west and homestead. So they just left Tennessee and started heading this way and hunting for wood and water. That's been made clear before that money wasn't important back then. And he finally found a spring at the Pruitt Bridge there. It's about 1.5 miles northeast of the Pruitt Bridge. He found a spring there, and of course wooded ground, and that's where he homesteaded in 1870. And my grandfather was his first child. His name was Jonah Pruitt, and he was born on July the 4th, 1871. Wow. And then, long story short, I came along, and they lived across the street here. He bought a house there in 1920, and they lived there until my grandmother, he passed away, and then my grandmother passed away. They lived just about 50 years. And, but my grandfather, my grandfather used to tell me about my great-grandfather. He lived there for 55 years on the farm that we have now, and he never made $100 in a year in his life. And it's just like we've been told before, things were difficult. You just trade a chicken for a hog or whatever to get along in your little garden, shoot a squirrel or something, and that's just the way you made it. And they all, I think, turned out real well. My grandfather became sheriff here in 1902, and my mother was born at the jailhouse down here. So then the sheriff there wasn't any deputies or anything, he took care of the prisoners, and my mother was born there in the jail in 1904. So we go back quite a ways here in Newton County. It's been wonderful, good to us. We've enjoyed every minute of it, and there's a whole lot of nice people moved in here since then. We appreciate you all very much.
Tell them how many schools were here in the early.
Well, my grandfather, you'd like to do other things than hear me talk, but I'll just tell one more little story. My grandfather, like I say, he was born July the 4th, 1871, and his daddy, at the end of the 4th grade, his daddy told him, we've got to clean these fields up and everything, and you're through with school. That's the last school that schooling that he did when he was 10 years old in the 4th grade. But he was interested in books and things, and he had just been fascinated with that, and he started just getting books from neighbors and whatever, and reading, and by George, he got his first job when he was 20 years old, teaching school. At Wilcoxon, that's now Marble Falls. He taught at Wilcoxon, and I've been told Some of you may have a more accurate figure, but I've been told that there was over 40 schools in Newton County in 1890. Because the only way you could go to school was to walk. And just every 2 or 3, 4 miles by George, they'd build another little school. And it was difficult times, but a bunch of good people grew up from it. I'm proud of them.
Okay. Joe, tell them about how the bank started here in Newton County and your grandfather in the Depression. One more, come on.
Can you put up the one more? Well, on the other side, this is my grandfather, Nance. He was born over just out of Newton County, over in Boone County. But he ended up, they started the bank here in 1903, the Newton County Bank. And he went to work 2 months after the bank opened in 1903, just went to work there at the bank and stayed in it for 43 years. He retired in 1946. But the other people owned the bank, the Moore family and my other people were stockholders and everything. He never did have any stock. He was just you might say the cashier and the manager of the bank. And so you can imagine from 1903, and then we went through good times and then bad times. And when things got really difficult there in 1931, and all the banks in the country started closing, and my grandfather and the stockholders got together and called a meeting at the court, the old courthouse right here on the square, and let everybody know, please come if you had a deposit in the bank or if you had any business with the bank, come, we need to talk to you. My grandfather did all the talking, and he let them know the times were tough, and if each one of you wanted your money back, we'd have to shut the bank down because they had money loaned out and things, and they didn't have all your deposit when it was $5 or $50 or $500. But if you'll stay with us, you're all our customers, and 99% of the money is loaned to you folks right here in Newton County. Well, we'll keep this bank alive. They all got up and stood up and talked to a bunch of people that you all would know, Rufus Waters, a bunch of good old boys around here, and they voted to keep the bank open. And I think I'm safe in saying it was the only bank in North Arkansas that stayed open. All of them in Boone, and Searcy, and Carroll, and the other counties, they had to shut down. But they kept the Newton County Bank open. And when they voted to keep it open, I'll choke up a little bit here. My grandpa, this was 1931, and he was making $90 a month. And he said, in appreciation of you keeping this bank open, I will stay on and I'll take a 50% cut in pay. He did. Thank you so very, very much. We appreciate you folks very much. Everybody in Newton County, God bless you.
Well, I want to sing a song. You didn't know I could sing, did you? You know, every year, all my children's lives and my grandchildren's life, all we did was float the river and camp out. Well, this is a song that I taught my grandchildren, and you must learn it. Born on the river named the Buffalo, prettiest place that you ever could go. Don't throw your trash down, put it in a sack. Hey, good feller, let me pat you on the back. Don't trash the buffalo, don't trash the buffalo.